Every spring, snow from the Rocky Mountains is supposed to rescue Lake Powell. But in 2026, it did not. The snow melted, the rivers ran, and Lake Powell still failed to rise. If Lake Powell cannot recover during the very season built to refill it, what happens during the next 8 months when more water leaves Lake Powell than enters it? This video will show you why this method disappeared and how to bring it back step by step. Lake Powell was built to work like a giant seasonal battery for the upper Colorado River Basin. Winter snow builds up across Colorado, Utah, and Wyoming. Then spring and early summer send that water downhill through the Green River, the San Juan River, and the Colorado River into Lake Powell behind Glen Canyon Dam. In a healthy pattern, Lake Powell rises fast during runoff season. That rise is the system's breathing room. In 2026, that breathing room almost vanished. According to the Colorado Basin River Forecast Center and federal water tracking cited in the prompt research, unregulated inflow to Lake Powell during May was only about 18% of the modern average. The June forecast was about 7% of average. The April through July runoff forecast was about 15% of average. Lake Powell ended June lower than it was at the end of May. That is the part that changes the story. Lake Powell did not just get less water. Lake Powell lost its normal recovery season. The spring rise that managers count on barely showed up. Then the line turned down again. Once that runoff window closes, there is no second natural refill waiting later in the year. Lake Powell then faces summer and fall with releases, evaporation, and continued decline. To understand why that is so dangerous, you have to look at Glen Canyon Dam by elevation, not just by shoreline. Full pool at Lake Powell is 3,700 feet. The protective target is 3,525 feet. Minimum power pool is 3,490 feet. Dead pool is 3,370 feet. These numbers are not interchangeable. They mark very different problems. Lake Powell is now around 22 to 23% full and near that protective target elevation. The immediate threat is not that Lake Powell has already reached dead pool. It has not. The real threat is that the safety buffer above minimum power pool has become very thin. At minimum power pool, Glen Canyon Dam can no longer run its hydroelectric turbines in the normal way. Water would have to move more through lower outlet works. That means less flexibility, more operating stress, and the loss of a major power source tied to Glen Canyon Dam. Dead pool is lower still. At dead pool, gravity can no longer send stored water through Glen Canyon Dam in the usual way. Only water flowing into Lake Powell could keep moving downstream. That distinction matters because it cuts through a common misunderstanding. The danger is not only the final worst-case number. The danger is the loss of operating space before that point. Lake Powell can still be above dead pool and already be in deep trouble. So why did the snow not become river water? The old way of talking about this story was drought. Drought sounds temporary. It suggests dry years followed by recovery. The newer and more disturbing idea is aridification. That means the upper Colorado River Basin is getting warmer and drier in a way that changes how water moves through the whole system. The prompt research points to a historically weak mountain snowpack, a warm and dry winter, and record-breaking heat during March that sped up snowmelt. Earlier melt exposes darker ground sooner. Snow reflects sunlight. Dark soil absorbs it. That means more heat goes into the land surface. Dry soils then drink up more meltwater before it reaches creeks and rivers. Plants also use more moisture during a longer warm season. More water goes back into the air through evaporation and evapotranspiration, which is water leaving soil and plants and returning to the atmosphere. The easiest way to picture this is simple. The upper Colorado River Basin used to act more like a funnel. Snow fell in the mountains. Then a larger share made it into the Green River, the San Juan River, and the Colorado River. Now the basin acts more like a dry sponge. Water still arrives, but more of it gets soaked up before it can reach Lake Powell. That challenges a belief many people still hold. A lot of viewers hear good snow year or snow is melting and assume Lake Powell should bounce back. 2026 shows that snow alone is no longer enough. What matters is runoff efficiency, which means how much of that snow actually survives the warmer landscape and becomes usable river flow. Federal managers are reacting like a system that knows its margin is disappearing. According to the details in the prompt research, the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation reduced the planned annual release from Lake Powell to Lake Mead from about 7.48 million acre-feet to 6 million acre-feet. Managers also plan to move about 660,000 to 1 million acre-feet from Flaming Gorge Reservoir toward Lake Powell. That is an extraordinary picture of the Colorado River system. Water leaves Flaming Gorge Reservoir in Wyoming and Utah, moves down the Green River, and helps support Lake Powell. At the same time, less water is sent out of Lake Powell through Glen Canyon Dam toward Lake Mead and Hoover Dam. No new water is being made. Water is being shifted and held back. That buys time for Lake Powell. It protects elevation at Glen Canyon Dam, but it also lowers Flaming Gorge Reservoir and means less water arrives at Lake Mead. Under the current most probable federal projection described in the prompt, Lake Powell keeps declining through the rest of 2026 and could approach or even drop below minimum power pool in early 2027. That is a projection, not a guarantee, but it is close enough to force emergency action now. And this is where the story gets bigger than one reservoir. Lake Powell and Lake Mead are not separate water stories. They are one connected storage system on the Colorado River. Water enters from the upper Colorado River Basin, pools behind Glen Canyon Dam at Lake Powell, passes Lee's Ferry, runs through the Grand Canyon, reaches Lake Mead behind Hoover Dam, then moves toward Arizona, Nevada, California, and Mexico. Protecting Lake Powell can hurt Lake Mead. Less release from Glen Canyon Dam means less inflow to Hoover Dam. The prompt research says federal officials have warned that this trade-off could reduce Hoover Dam's hydropower generating capacity substantially. So the crisis becomes a series of hard choices. Protect Glen Canyon Dam or protect Hoover Dam. Hold more water in the upper Colorado River Basin or move more toward the lower basin. Preserve power generation or preserve storage in a different place. Every move solves one problem by pushing pressure somewhere else, and a lot depends on those choices. The Colorado River supports about 40 million people across Wyoming, Colorado, Utah, New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, and California. It supports tribal communities, farms, ecosystems, recreation, and hydropower. The places tied to this system include Phoenix, Tucson, Las Vegas, Los Angeles, San Diego, Denver, Salt Lake City, the Imperial Valley, and the Central Arizona Project. That does not mean household taps in those cities suddenly shut off tomorrow. Large cities often have stored supplies, groundwater, water recycling, conservation rules, and backup planning. The first impacts are more likely to show up in other ways. Less hydropower can mean higher power costs. Lower deliveries can hit agriculture. Reservoir access can fall. Boat ramps can close. Groundwater pumping can increase. Outdoor water rules can tighten. Expensive projects can move faster. Fights over who cuts first can get sharper. Agriculture uses most of the Colorado River's consumed water. That fact is real. But this is not a simple hero and villain story. Farms in places like the Imperial Valley produce food and support rural economies. Cities need water too. Tribal nations have rights and long-delayed climbs. Ecosystems need flow. Everyone is tied to a river system that was promised out on paper at a level the modern river is struggling to provide. That legal problem is now colliding with the physical one. The Colorado River Compact was signed in 1922 and divided 15 million acre-feet of water each year among the states, according to the research provided. Hoover Dam was completed in 1936, creating Lake Mead. Through the 2000s into 2023, studies in the research suggest Colorado River flow fell by about 20% from early 2000s levels. That means the system was allocated during a wetter past, then hit by a drier and warmer present. Now the timing makes the danger worse. Major operating rules for Lake Powell, Lake Mead, shortage sharing, drought response, and coordination with Mexico are scheduled to expire at the end of 2026, according to the prompt. So the 7 basin states, tribal nations, federal officials, cities, farmers, water agencies, environmental groups, in Mexico are trying to negotiate the next set of rules while the reservoirs sit near critical thresholds. The upper basin position is straightforward. Colorado, Utah, Wyoming, and New Mexico cannot control how much snow and runoff nature produces. The lower basin position is just as direct. Arizona, Nevada, and California argue that when storage drops, Users need clear and measurable cuts. Strip away the legal language and the fight comes down to geography, law, pipes, dams, and arithmetic. That is also why ideas once pushed to the edge of debate are getting more attention. One of them is fill Mead first. The idea is to use Lake Mead as the main storage reservoir and allow Lake Powell to become much smaller, instead of trying to maintain two giant half-full reservoirs. Supporters argue that this could consolidate storage, reduce some evaporation and operating complexity, and even reopen parts of Glen Canyon. Critics point to legal duties between basins, hydropower loss at Glen Canyon Dam, delivery problems, and environmental risks. It is a debated proposal, not adopted policy, but the fact that it is being discussed shows how far the Colorado River crisis has moved. The frightening part is not one dramatic photograph from Lake Powell. It is the collapse of an old assumption. The whole Colorado River system was built around the belief that mountain snow would refill the system after bad years. In 2026, the snow melted, the runoff came, and Lake Powell still failed to recover. The dams are still standing. Glen Canyon Dam still blocks the river. Hoover Dam still holds back Lake Mead. The canals still stretch toward Phoenix and Southern California. The legal agreements still promise water, but the water entering the system is shrinking. That does not mean Deadpool is inevitable. It does not mean the Colorado River disappears. It does mean the fixes have to match the new reality. Managers can cut releases. They can move water from places like Flaming Gorge Reservoir. Cities can recycle more. Outdoor use can be reduced. Farmers can be paid to conserve. Irrigation can be updated. New rules can adjust faster to the water that actually exists. But every real solution leads back to the same hard number. The Colorado River Basin has to use less water than the Colorado River now produces. And that brings the story back to spring. Every year, the Rocky Mountain Snowpack is supposed to lift Lake Powell and restore the buffer. In 2026, that rescue barely happened. That is the warning. If the United States eventually has to choose, should it protect Lake Powell, protect Lake Mead, or reduce water use hard enough to keep both from reaching their next critical threshold?